You're listening to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
Big John McCarthy has witnessed the best that the UFC had to offer.
That is it! Game, set, match! We have a new champion!
Your backstage pass to the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports. Only on the Ignotainment Media Network.
Let's get it on!
Hey everyone, welcome to Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and me, Sean Wheelock. Every week on this podcast, John and I give you an inside look at MMA and combat sports, always separating fact from fiction. On this week's program, we'll discuss Dan Henderson's first-round knockout win versus Tim Boetsch at last Saturday's UFC Fight Night in New Orleans, which John refereed and which showed that the 44-year-old Henderson is still very relevant and very dangerous. Big John and I will also examine the recent suspensions issued by the California State Athletic Commission to a pair of top Bellator fighters, Mike Richman and Fernando Gonzalez, and we'll take an in-depth look at the World Series of Fighting following their event last Friday, which barely topped 200,000 U.S. television viewers. Plus, we'll announce the winner of our ticket giveaway to Bellator Unfinished Business, Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock, set for Friday night, June 19th in St. Louis, in which you can watch live in the U.S. and Canada on Spike. And of course, as we do on every episode of Let's Get It On, John will answer your questions. So ask away via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. That's info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Remember that you can download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Well, on Saturday night, Dan Henderson recorded the 31st win of his outstanding pro MMA career when he knocked out Tim Boetsch in round one of the main event at UFC Fight Night in New Orleans, Louisiana. John, you refereed the bout, and you saw firsthand that at age 44, Dan Henderson is still a legitimate force in mixed martial arts.
I think Dan's going to be a legitimate force while he's got a right hand.
Yeah.
The H-bomb, as everyone calls it. You know what? You just look, he landed it the very first time that he threw it. He took a step back and Tim came forward, and that's, going to, intensify that blow. And when Tim came forward, he hits him with that right hand, stuns him. He kind of drops down, gets himself back up. Dan, lands a little bit of a knee. It wasn't that solid, but the uppercut, there was a right uppercut that he hit Tim Boetsch with. It was solid. And that, is what put Tim down. And when Tim went down, he was unable to really respond. He kept getting hit with right hands, and it was one after the other. It was degrading him with each one to the point where he actually went out. So I stopped the fight, and it was an impressive win because everyone was saying, let's be honest, the bigger name coming, in the UFC or in the sport of MMA between Tim and Dan is absolutely Dan Henderson. He's the first one that walked out. They had Tim Boetsch come out second, which is telling you they're thinking Tim is going to beat Dan. They're kind of using Dan as that stepping stone to kind of help Tim Boetsch launch a little bit deeper into that middleweight division, and I think Dan put an end to that one with that right hand.
Randy Couture fought until he was 47. Dan Severn fought until he was 53. Maybe because you and I aren't 18 anymore, but 44 doesn't seem that old. I guess to kids listening or watching UFC broadcasts or Bellator broadcasts, someone 30 is probably ancient, but I don't know if it's just the evolution, not of MMA, but just of athletics, where all athletes, regardless of if you're a fighter or a tennis player or a race car driver or a baseball player or a soccer player, you're probably taking better care of your body. You have a nutritionist, a physical therapist, strength and conditioning coach, and maybe you can go to an age where it was probably pretty much unheard of or not even considered 2 or 3 generations ago.
Yeah, really. I mean, you look at it, it's evolution, and it's the evolution of, just athletes in general, but what athletes do today as far as nutrition and conditioning and the knowledge that they have compared to the athletes of the past. Even you can go up into the 1970s, and if you were an NFL player, you played the season and then you had a job. You actually went and did a normal job. You sold cars, or you sold insurance, or if you were a lawyer, you went back to your law practice, whatever it was going to be. But it was not that football was a year-round job like it is now. Well, that's the way athletics is now. We've got guys that are training, 365 days. And they're obviously not training every one of those days, but throughout the year, they're working towards keeping their body in condition. They're working towards bettering their skills and their techniques. And that's what, guys are doing in fighting. And so you're going to see guys at a much, older age doing well than we saw in the past. But, no matter what anyone wants to say, you get to the age of 44 in fighting, that's old. That's old. I'm telling you, I can tell you just, from me and sparring and stuff, your mind doesn't change. Dan Henderson, looks at himself and he's 25 and the way he feels and the way he looks at himself, but there's no way that his body reacts the same at the age of 44 that it did at 25. His reflexes are just slower. Now, they're not that much slower, but slower to the point where it can make a difference, especially in fighting. And this is what guys like Randy Couture and Dan Henderson and the ones that, are fighting into this older age, they were able to compensate for that, decrease in speed. And they did it with technique and they're doing it with power. And there's all kinds of ways that you can try to compensate for it, but it's always there and it can always be exposed. And that's the thing that everyone needs to understand when it gets to guys that are older. If you have two guys that are of an upper age fighting against each other, well, then it's kind of even. You've got Kimbo Slice and you've got Ken Shamrock coming up. They're both older guys, no matter what anyone wants to think. Ken's 51, Kimbo's 41, 42. They both have reached that point where their speed is going to be diminished. But if they're going against each other, it's not going to be that big of a variable, where if they were going against a fighter that is a 25, 31-year-old fighter, it really shows in the difference between the two athletes.
Well, John, let's mention now and talk about in depth Ken Shamrock versus Kimbo Slice. You will be refereeing it. It's the main event for the upcoming Bellator this Friday, June
I don't know
19th.
if I'll be reffing it, but I'll be there.
Oh, I think I haven't seen the assignments. It's up to Tim Lukinoff, the commissioner of Missouri, but I have a hunch. I don't know. I'm just saying. I have a hunch. It could be someone else. I know you're on the card for sure. And I'll be commentating it for Spike in the U.S. and Canada with Jimmy Smith. If you're listening outside of the U.S. and Canada, we're on a lot of different networks. Some are in English, some are dubbed into your native language. All I can say is check your local listings, as hack as that sounds. That's the best I can do. I hope you're in a country where you can watch it live, or if not, find it on the internet. But, there's been a little bit of criticism, I think, not so much at Bellator, but I've seen more at the Missouri State Athletic Commission. What are you doing licensing a 51-year-old? But Ken Shamrock, and he's been tweeting out some photos, doesn't look like a 51-year-old. He doesn't even look like a 21-year-old. I mean, he's a specimen. He was a specimen back in Pancrase. He was a specimen at UFC 1.
Ken has been a specimen, basically his entire professional life. I look at the guy, he's, built like a Greek god. And, that's part of what has been his allure, and that's what people like about him in a lot of ways. But he's been able to hold on to that because Ken works out, Ken trains. It's a matter of, people that are looking at the Missouri State Athletic Commission and complaining about it. It's a very fine line to walk. And it's so hard for people to understand all of the dynamics that go behind this. But, the fighters themselves, Ken Shamrock, Ken, it's hard for him to change his mentality. He's been a competitor his entire life. And to give up that competition aspect, just to give it up and not have something else to put that energy into a direction that's going to be constructive, is incredibly hard. It's almost impossible. You have got to have something to go to. And right now, Ken has still always been about fighting. And that's his personality, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's great. But to sit there and to be the Missouri State Athletic Commission and say, no, because you have reached this specific age, you can no longer fight. That's a tough thing to do. That we do get mandatory retirements at certain, jobs and things like that. But if the person is in physical condition and shows themselves that they have the, acute mentality to participate in the fight in a productive fashion, if they have the physical ability to compete in that fight in a positive fashion, it's tough for any athletic commission to sit there and say, no, I'm not going to license you. You've got to have reasons. If you have the reasons, then you know what? Deny that license. But if you can't come up with a solid and verifiable reason, you really don't have the ability to tell the person no. There's been a lot of fighters, that have, come out and, Dan Severn was fighting, up to the age of 53, and that's fine. A lot of that was done on, sometimes without regulation. Indian casinos that didn't have regulation at times, there was ones that did, and they were licensing because Dan's very articulate. His mind is there. He understands exactly what he's doing. He knows what he's getting himself into. He's able to function at a high level. His physical conditioning and his body are still able to perform at that level, so they're letting him fight. We had a guy, there was a gentleman that came out of prison in in New York is where he was in prison, but, he was falsely accused of a murder, and he spent 25 years in jail. And he was a young boxer when he went to jail, and then he boxed a little bit when he was in prison. And then he gets out, and his one thing was, I want to have a pro fight. And he got licensed in the state of California after going through a lot. He went through a lot to get that license. He did he did workouts with, people inspecting what he's doing. He went through a ton of physical, medical conditions and physicals and things like that. And it came down to the point where, hey, this guy mentally is prepared to do this. He physically is prepared to do this. Yes, he is of an age of, in his mid-50s, but we can't deny him if he's proved that he is capable of performing at a level that we say, you know what, he deserves that license. And he was licensed, and he won his fight. It was his one fight in pro fighting. He's never fought again. But sometimes, you can't deny someone just because of a number of age. Everyone's different as far as how old they really are. There's people that, they'll give you a number, and they'll say, oh, I'm 47 years old, and they look like they're 67. And there's some people, you look at a Randy Couture or any of those, genetically, he may be at, 51 years of age right now, but truthfully, his age would probably be, if you could break him apart, he's going to be somewhere in his 30s because he's taken that good a care of himself, and he's done the right things throughout his life to make it to where his body is working at a much younger age.
John, I'm in full agreement with you. Let's throw it out to our listenership. Let us know what you think. So this week's poll question, you can, of course, cast your vote on our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. Do you feel that there should be a mandatory age maximum for pro MMA fighters? Vote yes or no at letsgetitonpodcast.com. John, you mentioned Dan Severn. Dan Severn, one of my all-time favorites. And the only time I met him, last November in Reno, it was the Legends of MMA Hall of Fame induction dinner. I was there with Art Davey. You were there being inducted as well. Dan Severn, I was talking to him. I was geeking out. I was being a fanboy, basically. Suddenly I was 14 years old again. But
I was geeking out.
We were talking about his career, and he said something so astute. He said, my theory was either be outside of punches or inside of punches, but don't get hit. And truthfully, that's how you get 101 pro MMA wins and fight till you're 53. Dan Severn, if he had taken beatings in his career, maybe he's done in 3 or 4 years, but his fighting style led him to a long career. And I think about boxing. Now, we're talking about the evolution of athletes, but you go back generations, really 3 generations, to Archie Moore, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, light heavyweight boxer of all time. I pulled this up on BoxRec in preparation for the show. John, after he turned 40, Archie Moore fought 30 pro boxing matches, and he only lost 2 of them. But anybody who's a student of that era of boxing knows Archie Moore never got hit. He was a master of not taking damage. And that's a lot of it. It's not, well, you're 50 years old or you're 20 years old. What type of fighting style do you have? I don't think Irish Mickey Ward or Arturo Gatti had the fighting style where they could have been going on and on past the age of 45. It's just not going to happen with that sort of style.
True. Let's go to modern day. Let's take a look at Bernard Hopkins. All right, here's a 50-year-old man. The thing about Bernard Hopkins is throughout his career, he has continually kept himself in peak condition. He goes and he does a pro fight, And within several days, he's back in the gym working again. And this is a guy that has fought to the point where he was the light heavyweight champion at 50 years of age. So to say that, that again, age is a number and it needs to be relative compared to what the person has done with their life and their body. But, there's all kinds of fighters out there. And the one thing you can look and say about Bernard Hopkins, you can say it about Dan Severn, you can say it about Ronda Rousey, has come up with a great line in saying, I will fight for as long as I continue to have fights that don't damage me. And that's the main key. When you accept those fights that end up being that war that damages your body, that changes who you are, you can only do that for so long. When you have fights where you're not accepting damage, you're not being hurt in any fashion, you can continue to fight for as long as you want. And that's what we have with certain fighters. We have certain fighters, and you and I talk about it all the time. There are fights that change people. They take so much damage in the fight, you can see that they're never the same as the fighter and sometimes never the same as the person. And that's part of our sport, and that's part of what you accept by being part of boxing or MMA. You know that it's a damaging, it's just damaging to your body what we do. And it can end up changing who you are. And when you have guys like Dan Severn, who is smart enough to say, look, I'm not going to sit there and punch with a puncher. I'm going to try to take him down. I'm going to grind him. I'm going to wear him. And I'm going to accept as little damage as possible. That's why he was able to have over 100 pro fights. That's, and you got to figure how old was Dan when he started? 30 some years of age. It's not like he started when he was a young guy, but still had all those fights because he didn't accept a lot of damage throughout his career. And that's what every fighter is looking to do is, I don't want to have the wars that the people love because those are what are going to shorten my career.
When I first started refereeing pro boxing on the Midwest circuit in the 1990s, I became friends with a fighter named Buck Smith, the Road Warrior Buck Smith. If you're a boxing hardcore, you probably know the name. Buck Smith's philosophy was that throwback of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, guys who would fight once or twice a month. And I asked Buck Smith, why are you doing this? And he said, my theory is the human body can take 10,000 punches. So I would rather take those 10,000 punches while getting paid in pro fights than take them in the gym. Because once I hit that limit, I know that I'm done. So why not fight 15, 20 times a year for as long as I can, because I'm going to get punched in the gym and sparring regardless. I think there's something to that. I don't know if 10,000 punches is exactly right, but like you mentioned Dan Severn, who I believe was 34 at UFC 4, his pro MMA debut. He came out of wrestling. He was an All-America at Arizona State, so he wasn't getting pummeled. He wasn't getting kicked and punched when he was a teenager. He wasn't coming out of Muay Thai. There's something to that, and if you look at longevity too, where does Dan Henderson come out of? He comes out of wrestling. Couture comes out of wrestling. Maybe it's what you put your body through at a young age. We all know the story of pro boxers who turned pro 16, 17, 18 years old, who are done by the time they're in their mid-20s because the human body can only take so much.
That's it. You bring up Buck Smith, and if anybody does know boxing, they know who Buck Smith is. And, Buck Smith is from, I think, Oklahoma.
Tulsa, that's right.
Yeah, and, Buck Smith had, I think, 180 wins. Something like that, 181, 180, 170 something. I mean, a lot of them are small show wins and stuff, but he had a huge knockout. He had over 100 knockouts, and Buck Smith didn't lose that much. He is just, he was just a tough guy that he took fights, but he didn't accept a lot of damage, and you can see how long he went. But that's the whole point. Everything is about how much damage you start taking, and when you start taking a lot of damage, it's what changes you as a fighter. It's what changes your abilities as a fighter. And that's the real measuring stick of what, even athletic commissions need to be looking at is how much damage has this person taken over the years? What have they shown me in their prior fights? Because that's what athletic commissions are looking at. They're looking at your prior fights. They're looking at your, how did you do? Now, it can be that you lost the fight, but how did you lose it? He lost a close 3-round decision. Okay, great. That's saying that he was competitive. He can lose, and it's okay. But when he's getting knocked out, he's taking heavy blows, He's got the KOs, and it's repeated. Next fight, next fight, next fight, same results. Now's when you're getting an athletic commission that can look and say, no, you've been knocked out your last 4 fights, 5 fights, 6 fights, and you're getting up in age. We're going to take a look and say, no, we're not happy with licensing you. We don't think this is the right thing for you at this time in your life. It's time for you to possibly look towards something else. But the athletic commission has got to have that to be able to, have something to verify why they're not going to give that license.
Yeah, and John, you know this as well as I do, and I think just about everybody in our listening audience is savvy enough to get this point. You can win and still take a beating. You can lose and not take much damage. And that's true, I think, for all combat sports, not just MMA.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same thing, you can take it off into any combat or, any type of sport that has contact. Why is it that you have certain players that can take, their career and have so many games and go for so long? Well, it's the amount, not so much of hits, because if you're in football, you're going to get hit, but it's who's delivering the hit and who is accepting it and how that's done. That makes a big difference. Every time you step onto a football field, that, hey, I have the possibility of really being hurt. That's part of what comes with the sport. I don't care what level it is, but especially when you're in the pros, because the guys are so big, so fast, so strong. You got 2 human bodies, coming in contact with each other. There's going to be damage. And it's the guys that are able to pick the right time to deliver the blow, how they deliver the blow. That's why you get the Ray Lewis's. Ray Lewis, look at all the hits that he had throughout his career. But usually he was the one that was delivering the blow. And that's the difference. When you're accepting the blow, it's a huge level change compared to being the one that's delivering it or being the one that's accepting it.
Now, one thing, too, that's inescapable is the fact that we're not seeing tiny fighters, regardless of the combat sport, fighting generally over the age of 40. There are obviously exceptions in everything in life, but when we're talking about boxers and MMA fighters with longevity going well into their 40s, even into their 50s, we're generally talking about the upper weight classes. And for me, that's because I think you lose quickness a lot quicker than you lose power. People can still be extremely powerful, even as they get into their 70s. But that quickness, I think, probably starts to go in your mid-20s. I could be wrong. That's just my experience of working in sports and in fighting my whole life.
No, you're not wrong. The one thing, speed kills. And we say it no matter what sport it is. When someone's fast, they have an advantage. And, it doesn't matter what you do. You can do things to try to, train your body. You can do things to try to improve your speed and everything. But as your age goes up, that speed starts to go down. It's the one thing that you don't lose power. Dan Henderson will always be able to hit somebody with the right hand and make them go. That hurt, because he's always going to be strong and he's always going to be able to deliver that power. It's the speed and the timing in which he can deliver it with is the question as he goes up in age, because as we go up, we lose speed and there's nothing you can do. And that's why, when I was talking about, Kimbo fighting Ken, both of those guys are going to be in a position where they're both older guys. That speed equation is not the same as if Ken, being a 51-year-old fighter, is now fighting a 27-year-old fighter. There's a huge difference in speed, and it's hard to explain if you've never done it, but in Ken's mind, Ken sees himself like he's 25. He thinks he can do things the same way, and he knows, he's got knowledge, he understands how to do certain things, but if he's in the ring with that 27-year-old, he'll see setups, he'll see feints, he'll see things, and he'll see openings, and he'll tell himself, okay, and he'll see the fighter throwing something. He knows what he needs to do to slip that punch, and all of a sudden the punch is hitting him instead of him slipping it, because his body just doesn't react at the same speed that it did when he was 27, 28, 29, 30. And there's nothing he can do about that. That's something that Father Time takes away from us. So speed is the thing that you're never going to be able to keep it. It's going to go away. And when you see lighter weight fighters Those guys live on speed. And that's why you're right. You don't see a lot of guys in the lightweights going on for a long time. If they're in that lightweight, lighter weight class and stuff, their careers usually end somewhere in the 30s. And that speed factor is the number one reason why. They don't have the power, that the heavier guys have, but that speed is something that they rely on to get them where they need to be and how they want to hit and where they want to, attack. That speed is what gets them there or gets them out. And when it's gone, you can't fight anymore.
John, last point on this. When you're refereeing a fighter like Henderson at 44, and again, we don't know the assignments, you're on the card for sure, but let's say you get 51-year-old Ken Shamrock versus 41-year-old Kimbo Slice in Bellator, or when you had Randy Couture, who was 46 and 47 years old. As a referee, are you looking at anything differently, or does age not even matter to you at that point?
No,
Just
age
the way
doesn't.
that they're reacting to the damage.
Yeah, you can't go off of someone's age as an official and stuff. You've got to give them the same level playing field that you're giving someone that is, a younger guy. But obviously, when you look and you see, there's times when you can see a guy that is older and in the fight, they're getting hit with shots and they can't stop those shots from landing. They're trying to move, and over time, they're being degraded by those shots that are landing and they can't stop it. And so, there comes a point where when you look at the fight and you say the person doesn't have a chance to win on the cards, they do not have a verifiable chance of landing that one punch KO that's going to change this fight around. And all they're doing is accepting damage. And the only thing that's going to happen in this fight is they're going to be degraded in their life. Then it's time to get them out. But, when they walk in that ring or that cage, you're going to treat them the same as you treat anyone. And as long as they are showing that they deserve to be there, you're going to let them be there.
Every week on this podcast, Big John and I answer your questions. Remember, fire away whatever you'd like to ask via email, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com, info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. And I can tell you, as the commentator who called 5 Magomed Rasul Hasbullayev fights, that saying names correctly is very important to me, so please include a pronunciation guide for your name. First up, Magomed Rasul Hasbullayev. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually a really easy name, Steve Ward. That would be awesome, though, if Magomed Rasul Hasbullayev actually asked a question. Wouldn't that be good? That'd be great. But I already know how to pronounce his name, so we didn't even need to send any pronunciation guide. Steve Ward asked, John, I'm a retired police officer, a jiu-jitsu competitor, and part-time MMA referee. How important do you think it is for referees to train in mixed martial arts in order to become a great referee?
I think it's important that the referees, when I say train, depends on what kind of training you're talking about. I don't believe that a referee needs to be, a good fighter to be a good referee. In fact, there's really none of us are good fighters.
Yeah, but you're a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt.
Yeah, but it's a matter of, to say, do you have to do the sport? Well, you've got to participate in it in some fashion, in my opinion, meaning you have to train. I'm not saying you have to have an amateur record. You don't have to have a pro record, but you have to train so that everything that the fighters are doing in there, you understand what they're doing. You understand when you're seeing a guy doing his setup. You see a guy with his footwork and you understand where he's going with that. You understand when someone's on the ground, there is no doubt in your mind, you know what they are going for when they are setting up positions to go for submissions, because those are the things that we end up having when we have a referee that doesn't really do our sport. They make mistakes based upon a lack of knowledge and understanding what they're looking at. And I've seen guys get to a beautiful position for a submission and they're just locking it in, and a referee comes in and goes, stop, stand up, and you go, oh my God. And it's because they don't understand what they're looking at. And so the main thing is they need to train in the sport, And when I say train, I'm not saying you need to be getting your butt kicked, someone knocking you out or anything like that. But you need to at least train with some stand-up so you understand what it's like to get rocked. You understand how your body reacts to it. You understand what your mind is doing. All that is important. When it comes to the ground game and all the grappling that goes on, you need to know everything that those guys are doing. If you don't know, that's okay. Learn. That's as quick as, the quick answer I can give you. you always need to be trying to improve yourself and evolve. And once you think that you know everything, then it's time to retire, because you're never going to know anything with our sport. It's too young. There's too many changes, too many things going on. The guys are doing different all the time. And you have to be part of the sport to be effective as an official, in my opinion.
Our next question comes from Mike Whitmore, one of our great Canadian listeners. Mike asked, is there any regulation on the type of cups that fighters can wear? And Mike says, I asked this as a longtime fan and practitioner of Muay Thai, where it is common to wear a steel cup. Are MMA fighters allowed to wear a steel cup? Mike then continues, get ready for the controversy here on this. Also, you see accidental groin shots in Muay Thai, but the fighters, especially the Thais, tend to just shrug them off. MMA fighters act like they're about to die of a heart attack. What could the reason for this disparity be? That's some good questions, Mike.
Oh, well, I guess it could be the size of the cup and the size of the fighter. No, I'm just kidding. Look at it. It's a good question. And the truth is, Mike, the cup that you're talking about, the steel Muay Thai cup, in my opinion, is the only cup I would wear if I was fighting. It's the best cup there is. It's on, when you put it on, it's on tight. It's tying, around your waist, it's tying up through your legs. A lot of fighters don't like it because it's going up the crack of their ass. There's no other way to say it. And it's uncomfortable, okay. And so we get a lot of fighters that will use different type of groin protection that is legal. There's no athletic commission that's going to sit there and say, oh, no, you can't have, this type of cup. Most of the cups are going to be allowed. It's groin protection. It's what the fighter picks. They can use it. But there's a ton of groin protection that's, put out there as it's meant for a catcher to wear in baseball, or it's meant for someone to use in a sport that is not the same as MMA. And when you get to MMA and you look at the type of groin protection that some of these guys are using, a lot of them are using the ones that have the, they've got the I don't know how to say it, the spandex pants that the cup goes inside, and they're wearing that, and it moves. And the biggest problem is when the cup moves, because it's not always the direct shot that hurts somebody. The direct shot is usually the one that any cup is going to take, and it's going to dissipate that blow. But when we get shots that are hitting to the side, and it takes in the cup is actually what, because it's got a freedom of movement, it's actually what hits you, it hurts. Or the cup gets hit from underneath and comes up. That type of movement is what hurts. And the Muay Thai cup, the steel Muay Thai cup, it's not going to move very much. And it's kind of stuck on you as, it's like an abalone shell, man. It's sucked on there. And that's why you'll see a lot of Muay Thai fighters get hit and no big thing. And that's why you'll see a lot of MMA fighters, getting hit and reacting in a bad way. It's the difference in the groin protection they're wearing. And if, you were asking me, I think the Muay Thai cup is the best thing to use. But a lot of guys don't like to use it just because of comfort. And that comfort really comes with grappling. There's a lot of guys that don't like it in the fact that they don't think it's fair for someone to use it because it is a steel cup, and if they're grappling with it, and their opponent is grappling with it, then it becomes something that is actually, a hard object that can be pressed into them. That is, it's different positions, different things that happen, and you can look at Tim Sylvia and Frank Mir when they fought. That arm break is due to a Muay Thai cup. That's a steel object that his arm was braced against, that Frank had enough strength and enough pull and enough leverage to break the bones of a guy's arm because of that fulcrum point that was that steel Muay Thai cup. Now, I still think it's the best cup, and it's what most guys should use.
Remember, keep your outstanding questions coming. info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Still to come on this week's episode of Let's Get It On, John and I will discuss the suspensions issued to Bellator fighters Mike Richmond and Fernando Gonzalez, including Richmond's highly unusual response. We'll also examine the state of World Series of Fighting following their most recent event last Friday in Edmonton, and we'll announce the winner of a pair of tickets to Bellator Unfinished Business, Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock, set for Friday night, June 19th in St. Louis. With Big John McCarthy, I'm Sean Wheelock, and you are listening to Let's Get It On. It's the book that Wrestling Observer calls a must-read for any MMA fan. Jonathan Snowden of Bleacher Report describes as riveting and amazing, and TheFightNerd.com says nothing is held back pick this book up right away. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, written by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by John McCarthy, is now available to listeners of this podcast at the special price of $12.48. That's far less than you'll pay for the book on Amazon and half price of what you'll pay in store at Barnes & Noble. Buy it directly from the publisher now online at ascendbooks.com and enter the promo code LEGAL50. That's ASCEND books.com, promo code LEGAL50. Learn the true story of how the UFC came into existence in the book that Randy Couture describes as honest, shocking, and enthralling, and that has a rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars from Amazon Reader Reviews. Is This Legal? The inside story of the first UFC from the man who created it, by UFC founder Art Davie and me, Sean Wheelock, with the foreword by Big John McCarthy. Available now online at ascendbooks.com for just $12.48 when you use the promo code LEGAL50.
For all of our listeners looking for great new designs in MMA apparel, look to the new clothing styles of Lambs to Lions. That's right, Lambs to Lions has got new styles with old and new put together. Boxing, MMA, everything. Go to lambstolionsbrand.com and check out their line of clothing.
Kimbo Slice, Ken Shamrock. On Friday, June 19th, they finally get to settle unfinished business.
Are you ready?
As Bellator MMA, presented by Miller Lite, is live from the Scott Trade Center.
This fight is over!
Plus, former lightweight world champion and Mizzou Wrestling All-American Michael Chandler comes home to battle Derek Campos.
Oh my God!
It's Kimbo versus Shamrock, live from the Scott Trade Center. Get your tickets now at the box office, Ticketmaster, or Bellator.com.
Now, back to Let's Get It On with your hosts, Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock.
This Friday, June 19th, both John and I will be in St. Louis, Missouri for Bellator Unfinished Business, Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock. Let's Get It On is partnered with Bellator MMA to give away a pair of tickets to this stacked fight card. A huge thanks to all of you who entered our ticket giveaway. And John, we can now announce the winner.
Yeah, our winner is Daniel Whelan from St. Anne, Missouri. You're the guy that had his name drawn. And so what I need from you is within 24 hours of this broadcast, you must answer by email to info@letsgetitonpodcast.com that you want those tickets so we can give them to you instead of giving them to somebody else. So make sure that you give us an email at info@letsgetiton.com to collect your tickets.
Congratulations. That's really well done. And we had entries coming in from all over. We'll hope to do more of this, more ticket giveaways in the future. Of course, if you'd like to purchase tickets to Bellator Unfinished Business, Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock, again, it is set for this Friday night in St. Louis. Go online. You can buy your tickets right now, Bellator.com. And our broadcast will be live in the U.S. and Canada on Spike beginning at 9 p.m. U.S. Canadian Eastern Time. And again, for those of you who are listening to our podcast outside of the U.S. and Canada, the best I can tell you is check your local listings or go play around on the internet. I hope that you can see it in your nation, and I hope you can see it live. Well, on Tuesday, it was revealed that 2 top Bellator fighters have been suspended by the California State Athletic Commission for failed drug tests following last month's Bellator 137 in Temecula, California. Mike Richmond tested positive for the steroid rostanolone and received a 2-year ban. Fernando Gonzalez tested positive for marijuana and was given a 90-day suspension. John, you and I have talked about the drug testing issues at length, including last week on this program. We talked about the partnership with the UFC and the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. We talked about the new stringent program in Nevada. We're seeing this now in California, and I believe that we're now in a new era for mixed martial arts when it comes to the issue of drugs, be it performance-enhancing drugs, John, or recreational drugs.
Yeah, this has been a hot topic. We've talked about it how much on our show here, and it's a matter of fighters are going to have to learn, man, they cannot take performance-enhancing drugs. They're going to get caught, especially when you're talking about commissions like California, Nevada. They do real type testing. There's all kinds of testing that people do. And all I can tell you is, man, when it comes to the big fight states, they're taking this serious. They're not going to, they've had it long enough, and they've had enough fighters come up with positive tests, and they've given them a limited suspension of 6, 9 months, maybe a year, and a $2,500 fine. And they've realized that, what that has done is made the fighter say, hey, it's worth it. My fight, I'm making this much. It doesn't matter if I'm off for 6 months, that's my normal time off. So really, I'm not getting punished at all. And they've changed the punishments. They've changed, the consequences of what's going to happen to the fighter. And the fighter now has got to look at it and say, this is not worth it. I cannot accept that kind of penalty because it's going to damage my career.
Remarkable reaction from Mike Richmond, who's one of my favorite guys in this sport. Mike took full accountability for his actions, and we just don't see that when it comes to positive drug tests, not just in fighting, anywhere in the sports world. Look at cycling, look at baseball. It just doesn't happen, but it happened here. So Mike Richmond took to Facebook and he wrote, I'm quoting now, I want to say that I lost the integrity in myself and the integrity of this sport. I will not sit here and deny that I took it or act like I didn't know what I was taking or blame it on someone else. I am a cheat, plain and simple. Mike Richmond then continued, quote, I take full responsibility in my actions and the decisions I made. I also deserve the punishment the California State Athletic Commission brought down upon me. John, I think oftentimes you judge people not by their victories, but by their losses and how they deal with losses. This is a huge loss for Mike Richmond. He turns 30 on June 23rd. He's out for 2 years in the sport that he loves, that he makes his living in. But talk about responding to a mistake with absolute class and absolute grace.
Oh, you know what? I was so impressed by Mike Richmond's response to that. I tweeted to him. I told him that, hey, I totally respect and admire your honesty in, what is a very tough situation. And I look forward to seeing him back once it's passed. And I meant every word that I said, because we have so many guys that are out there that sit there and they get caught and they go, no, I didn't. No, I didn't take that. No, I didn't know. Well, someone else is in charge of my nutrition. All those excuses are not cutting it. You are responsible for what goes into your body. And it's really, it's a shame that Mike Richmond is going to have a 2-year suspension as far as not being able to fight during that time. But hopefully he's that guy that everyone now looks at and goes, uh-oh, I can't do what I'm doing. I need to stop it. I need to change, because if I do, I'm going to end up with a 2-year suspension like Mike Richmond. And it can get worse. The suspensions that they're going to start handing out, you start having a second offense, you start having a third offense, this is going to change. Our sport has to change. This is about not only cheating. This is about, our sport is about damage. We've said it how many times, and we allow one human being to damage another. This is not like, oh, I took steroids and I hit the ball 470 feet instead of 420 feet. That's great. But in baseball, the steroids, it may not be fair, but it's not going to end up possibly hurting somebody. In football and in fighting, it can make a difference. It can make a difference in you damaging someone to the point where they're that different person. And we need to get rid of it in our sport. Boxing and MMA cannot have performance-enhancing drugs as part of it. It needs to be something that's in the past. And, with what's now come out, looking at the punishment for a performance-enhancing drug that Mike Richmond has been levied, against him, hopefully it gets everyone's attention. Stop. If you're doing it, stop. Don't do it. Get rid of it. Figure out a better way. There's got to be a better way, and if you can't figure out the better way, then just stop fighting.
Fernando Gonzalez is also a guy I really like. He's a quality person. Now, he popped for marijuana. It's his second failed marijuana test. I know a lot of you listening, a lot of fight fans say there's a huge difference between performance-enhancing drugs, such as what Richmond was detected with, and quote-unquote recreational drugs, such as marijuana, which Fernando Gonzalez was detected with. So Gonzalez's punishment from the California State Athletic Commission, again, this is a second failed marijuana test in California, a 90-day suspension, which is basically meaningless because he didn't have a Bellator fight within a 3-month window, and a $1,500 fine. John, where do you come down on this situation? Because again, the suspension, it's a suspension with an asterisk because he wasn't going to fight in that period. And I think a lot of fighters would say, if I get certain benefits that make me a better fighter with marijuana, I'll happily pay the $1,500.
Here's my question to you. What benefits are you going to get from marijuana that's going to make you a better fighter?
Now, I could talk a lot about Jack Daniels and Bacardi. I really can't help you on marijuana. I never went down that road. I was more the Jack Daniels type myself.
I'm being honest. Look,
I guess relaxation or pain management. That's my best guess. Is a really uninformed opinion.
And that, in my opinion, that's probably what it is and stuff. It's a way to have the fighter relax. It could be a pain management type of thing, but performance enhancing, I don't see it. Now, I'm telling you, here I go. I have never, ever in my life ingested any type of marijuana, cannabis, THC, anything like that. So I'm not the perfect person to say, what, benefits it's going to have or not have. But I have worked around a lot of people that were high on, different types of drugs. And I can tell you the one that I never worried about was marijuana.
And this is you speaking as a police officer, not as a referee, but as a police officer where you saw some awful things for the LAPD.
Absolutely. And so when I look at Fernando Gonzalez, I look at a fighter who, this is his second time that he's been caught with marijuana. Now, Nick Diaz has had a lot of things, come up with marijuana. And I'm in that position where you're going to have to prove to me that marijuana is performance enhancing. I don't in any way see how it's a performance enhancer. I do see how it is something that many people take and almost get, that they have to take it to sleep or they have to, do it to relax in a certain way. And anytime that your body becomes addicted to something in that fashion, I'm going to tell you, I don't think it's a good thing. But I don't think that in the realm of competition, marijuana is an added or beneficial drug. So when it comes to Fernando Gonzalez and you look at the suspension they gave him, the 90 days, you're right. What they're saying is, hey, you can't fight for 90 days. He wasn't going to end up fighting for 90 days under contract with Bellator anyways, probably. So that's really not going to be the big thing. They're looking at going after him more monetarily. Now, they spanked him, I think, the first time he got a $250 or $300 fine. This time, his fine went to $1,500 plus he must pay for the testing that it took to do, when he got tested at Bellator, all the cost for him to get tested and the lab cost, he's also going to have to pick up. So you're going to say that's going to be at least another $800. So he's looking at about a $2,300 fine. A $2,300 fine for marijuana, that's pretty reasonable, I think. That's a hard fine. That's something, it's gonna hurt his pocketbook. That's, really in this type of situation, this is the area that I think if you're going to hurt him, you got to hurt him through the pocketbook. Don't take away his ability to continue his fighting career for any length of time, because it's not that serious of, a violation. It's a violation. He's supposed to go along with what, he's signed his name down to, but there's a huge difference between what Mike Richmond was taking and what Fernando Gonzalez was taking.
California is a state that has medical marijuana cards, and as we're seeing liberalization and legalization of marijuana laws across the United States, I wonder if this is a substance that will even be tested for in 5 years or 10 years, because it's easy to forget these tests cost money. They're not cheap. You have to test these. You have to use real testers and real tests. It's not like you just say, "Hey, blow in here and let's see if you've smoked marijuana or you have THC in your system." These are expensive, and I think it's a valid question to say, why are you even testing? When John, you just said a moment ago, you don't see this as a performance-enhancing drug because you're not testing for caffeine, you're not testing for tobacco. A lot of people, you're not testing for alcohol. A lot of people would see marijuana in the same realm.
And that's exactly how I see marijuana. Look at, they don't test for alcohol. Now, I don't think that a drunk fighter is going to have any benefit. Let's be honest. I've seen enough drunk people fight that it's, it definitely is not performance enhancing. But, I think someday you're absolutely right. I think within 5 to 10 years, I think marijuana is going to be not even tested. And, it's just that at this point in time it is, and the fighters need to, follow that, that set of guidelines that is put in place for them. You got to toe the line, man. You got to sit there and do what you said that you're going to, follow. And at this point in time, they're not even testing out of competition. It can't be in your system in competition. And that in competition is from that weigh-in until just after the fight. So, man, you know what? If you need to take, a couple of weeks away from, what you normally do, then take the couple of weeks away from it, be a man, and get through your fight, and then go back to doing whatever you're going to do.
John, I think the dirty little secret in all of this is, had Richmond and Gonzalez not fought in California, there's a good chance that neither one gets detected, or maybe Gonzalez does, but not Richmond, just because of what we talked about. The cost, the logistics of testing fighters. There are legitimate ABC members, not loosely commissioned or soft commissioned states, but very solid commissioned states with really good athletic commissioners that just don't have this budget for testing. And if you're going down now to AMI shows or very small MMA shows that are held in a National Guard armory or in a Ramada Inn ballroom or in a high school gym, you're probably not seeing any testing whatsoever. It's not consistent. That's what the UFC is trying to do with their new program with USADA, but then the UFC is also a multi-billion-dollar worldwide corporation.
Yeah, but you look at it, and what people have got to understand is, although athletic commissions, everyone, they're looking at them saying they're the same. They're not the same.
No, not at all.
They're not the same for a variety of reasons. And one of them is, just the amount of fights that they all do is different. There's no state that does more fights than California. But, what people also need to understand is many of those shows, when a UFC or a Bellator comes to California, or if you have an Al Heyman's, Premier Boxing Championship, or a Golden Boy, or a Top Rank show that's a bigger show, those shows make money for the state of California. The state of California will actually make a little bit of money, or sometimes a pretty good amount of money, on the ticket sales, on the taxes that are levied against them, sometimes on the pay-per-view, all the different things that they end up putting some type of, price on. They'll make money. But for the majority of shows, let's take a look at the state of California. The California State Athletic Commission loses money. They know going in that when they allow this show, they are going to run at a deficit based upon the amount of inspectors that it takes to put at the show and everything that is going to be expected to be there. So they're happy with their regulation. They know that they're running at a deficit. And so now you bring in drug testing on top of it. Now you're talking running at a bigger deficit. And so a lot of commissions, they just can't afford the type of testing all the way around. Now there's always going to be the way to do a test where you have the pee in the, they're going to pee in the cup. It's going to have a marker where it'll just say there's something that shows up. And then they can possibly take that test to a lab and have them test just that one test. And, that's possible. But again, when athletic commissions are not making money on these shows and always running at a deficit, now you're asking the government, that state entity, to pay for the athletic commission. And trust me, the states don't want to pay. They don't want something that's costing them money. And so they're going to usually say, well, you need to, what can you cut? What can you cut? And the state's going to look and say, well, why are you spending so much money on this? When they see that big number for drug testing, they're going to start to say, well, we don't, let's cut this. Not looking at it in the way that they should. They're only looking at it based upon money.
Well, so far on Let's Get It On, we've talked UFC, we've talked Bellator. Let's now turn our attention to World Series of Fighting. Last Friday, World Series of Fighting 21 took place in Edmonton and drew a U.S. television audience on NBCSN of just 203,000 viewers. World Series of Fighting has now failed to crack 250,000 television viewers for their last 10 U.S. broadcasts. Now, let's put those numbers in perspective. Saturday's UFC Fight Night from New Orleans, which aired on Fox Sports 1 in the U.S., drew a TV audience of 950,000 viewers for the main card. Now, the 6 Bellator broadcasts on Spike, of course, a disclaimer, I'm the play-by-play commentator for Bellator, but these are the numbers. They've averaged 677,000 U.S. television viewers. John, obviously TV ratings aren't everything in MMA, but they count for a lot. And the viewership numbers for World Series of Fighting right now are honestly looking pretty bleak.
It's so unfortunate that we get, and there's reasons why for everything, but it's really unfortunate when we have really a good promotion, a promotion that's putting out good fights. They've got really good fighters on their roster, and they just can't get that hold of people to come in and care about the fighters that they're putting out there and the fights that they're putting on. They just can't get that, that grab that, you're looking for. The UFC is obviously, they're the monster out there that everybody, when they're looking at MMA, is going, oh, that's Ultimate Fighting. Well, that's a promotion, and it's a great promotion, but it's not all of MMA. Bellator has its foothold. It's got enough of a fan base where it's doing well with Spike. Enough people know that Bellator is what's on Spike, and they're going to watch Bellator MMA on Spike, and they're going to watch the UFC on Fox, and they almost to a point just don't care about the World Series of Fighting. It's just really hardcore people are the only people that are really that are catching on with it, and they've got great fighters. You look at Jake
fighters.
Shields is there. David Branch is a great fighter. Husamar Palhares.
They have
You look at a
Tyrone
guy that's-
Spong.
Oh my God!
Yeah, Yushin Okami,
Moraes,
Ivanov.
I mean,
yeah.
it's amazing, that they have the level of some of the fighters they have, and they just can't catch on. John Fitch being there, and they've had guys. Let's take a look at Anthony Johnson. Where was he fighting? Well, when he left the UFC, he ended up in a couple different places. Then he ended up at the World Series of Fighting and was doing great for them, and then he ended up going back to the UFC. He ends up fighting for the light heavyweight championship. That tells you the level of some of the fighters that they have. And for some reason, it's just not catching the public's eye. They just don't seem to care about it.
And even though I work for Bellator, look, I'm a fan of MMA. I talk about this all the time on Let's Get It On. I talk about it in media interviews that I do. I want our sport to succeed. I want there to be opportunities for fighters to make money, people who work in the MMA industry to make money. Do I want World Series of Fighting to be more successful than Bellator? No way. Do I want World Series of Fighting to be successful? Absolutely, I do. I watch all of their shows. I was in that television audience watching on Friday night. I DVR'd it. I didn't watch it live. But I wanted to see how Blagoy Ivanov did. But I watch all of those shows. You're talking to a guy that goes to local shows in Kansas City. But, John, you and I think most people listening to this podcast are in the hardcore category. And you just have to wonder, is there room to be number 3? I was the commentator for number 3 for a long time. When Strikeforce was still around, Bellator, we were the number 3. It's tough. We're owned by Viacom. Bjorn Rebney is out, so we're owned by a multi-billion-dollar corporation, just like the UFC is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. But, man, I think it's tough to kind of be in that upper middle class right now in MMA.
It is. It's incredibly tough. There's just not – I look at it and it's almost, it's got to be almost like what, in the early 1900s when the Ford, Motor Company came out and you had the Model T. And they're selling all of those, cars. And then you get a couple of guys that, have a little bit different concept of how to do it. And you get the Dodge brothers and, all these. And they just can't sell anything close to what Ford is doing. And it's because the public bought into, Ford that's the maker of those cars. That's the maker of the horseless carriage. That's the one that, it works and it, you can rely on it. And that's really, in the world of MMA, promotions are big. It's very similar between MMA and pro wrestling. Boxing is a different entity. No one really seems to care about who's the promoter of a boxing match. They don't care if it's, Al Heyman. They don't care if it's Oscar De La Hoya. They don't care if it's Don King or Bob Arum. That doesn't mean anything to them. They care about so much as just the fighters. Where in the world of MMA, and a lot of it's because really it's modeled after the world of professional wrestling. You look at, there's been all kinds of different professional wrestling groups, and at one time you had, the WWF, back when you also had the WCW, which was another big competing group. And then you had ECW and you had the Extreme Championship Wrestling that came in that was always that third one, behind the top two. But really, it was always the WWE turning into the WWF turning into the WWE that was always the number one. Even when the WCW seemed to be really taking over and taking all the stars, The WWE was always that one, and that's what the UFC is. And people look to it. They will buy that product. They will sit there and put their money down because they know that when they watch the UFC, they're going to be getting what they believe is a good product with great fighters. And I don't know that they've bought in enough when it comes to some of the other promotions that they believe that those fighters are of the same quality that the fighters of the UFC are.
It's funny that when you go to a local show, if they're the quote unquote hometown heroes, the local kids, and they're having to hustle and sell tickets, but it's not uncommon to see around the US and Canada crowds, 1,500, 2,000 jam-packed crowds. But those shows, the mom and pops, which account for what, probably 99% of all MMA, they don't aspire to be more than that. They want to make some money and do the shows. It's tough when you aspire to be the UFC and you don't have that type of money. You know, if you look around the world, if you look at KSW, which is doing very well in Poland, we talk about One Championship a lot, which is really trying to be the number one in Asia right now. They're national promotions or regional promotions, but for me, John, if you're not the UFC or Bellator, you better be that really successful local show, because again, in that middle ground where the World Series of Fighting is living and where somebody like Titan is living, it's really tough going right now. Again, I wish them all the best of success. I want to see fighters make money and have opportunities, and fight industry people have opportunities, but it's really difficult to live in that mid-range.
It is difficult, you know, and there's a lot of promotions where you look at that want to be in that mid range. The real thing that separates, you know, look at the UFC is the big dog, and you got Bellator as the second dog. And when you're the World Series of Fighting and you come out and you basically say that you're going to compete with those two, well, then people are looking at you as, well, you're lesser than them because I just don't look at you as being that quality. Where you can be, you know, a different type of promotion. Look at RFA. You know, they are not trying to say that, you know what, we've got the best fighters in the world. They're trying to say that we have the best up and coming talent that you're going to see in the future, and you want to see them now in their early fights. That's a way of getting people to say, okay, yeah, I'll look at those guys. Let me see what you got, and they'll see that there's great fights going on, and they've got great fighters, and they'll be able to follow that fighter's career from being in the RFA to going into a Bellator or into a UFC, and they've got some background on them. It works. But once you decide that you're going to compete with the big boys, you've got to really, you know, do something. You've got to really do something to catch people's imagination and get their attention. And it just hasn't happened with the World Series of Fighting so far. And it's not because they don't have good fighters. They've got some really talented guys. They've got, you know, a good roster that's not the deepest roster in the world. I'm not going to sit here and lie about it. But, you know, there are guys on, you know, their card that can fight with anybody in any organization.
John, final point on this. It's amazing that, consider our sport didn't even begin until 1993, how the road is littered with all of these failed promotions. Some had a lot of money, some had very little money, but most just could not make it more than a few years. I mean, you and I were both involved in Affliction. Look at all the T-shirt money. I know what I was paid. It was a lot. I have a good idea that you were probably paid higher than your normal rate too, and they lasted 2
I didn't get
shows.
paid nothing. Okay.
Well, you announced the first one and you refereed the second one.
And I didn't make a dime. Okay, let's be
I guess
honest.
I got all your money then on that.
I got loaned over by the company that I was working for so they could get the broadcast. They got the broadcast and I got to work.
Well, you were the only person then, because they definitely, and you know,
they put out huge money. All right, here's the truth. All right, most people don't know this, but you know, when Affliction came about, you know, Affliction's promotion came about because Todd Beard, who was one of the owners of Affliction, got into a pissing contest with the UFC. Affliction really got going based upon their, you know, marketing with fighters in the UFC, and then becoming, you know, a sponsor of the UFC and having the UFC promote their brand. Their brand just exploded. And then there, you know, came a point where they got into a pissing contest with each other, and Todd Beard basically said, you know what, fine, I'll do my own fights. And, you know, Affliction was banned from the UFC. The fighters could not walk in with the T-shirts. They couldn't do any of that. And Todd Beard called me and asked me to come down. I went down to see him. He offered me the job of being his Dana White. And when he offered that job, I said, thank you so much, but there's certain things I need to ask you, because I knew that he was collecting fighters. He was starting to go after some guys, and he was paying exorbitant amounts of money. And I basically, said, how much money are you willing to lose? That's what I need to know. And he basically told me, he says, I'm willing to lose up to $10 million. And I said, Todd, you're getting close with the payout to your fighters of doing that now. And he had, at the time, he had a mistaken idea of what he thought he was going to be able to get in pay-per-view buys.
As does everyone, right?
And at the time he thought he was going to get over 500,000. And I told him, I said, you will be lucky. You will hit a home run if you get 100,000. That's a grand slam for you, being a first-time show, to get enough people to check out a new promotion, even though, yes, you've got talented fighters. You've got some of the world's best. You're bringing in the greatest guys there are. It doesn't matter. You don't have the brand. And without that brand, you're just not going to get that number up into the 500,000s. People have to believe in the brand. And, we sat there, and I realized quickly, you know what? In my opinion, they're not going to make it. They're not going to be successful. And I don't want to be part of something that's going to be, here for a couple of fights and then, go away. And so I turned the offer down, and it was for a lot of money. I would have made a lot more money with that job than I ever made anywhere else. And I didn't want to be part of something that I didn't think was going to be successful. And so there's been those shows. There's a lot of shows out there that, they're, 1, 2, 3 times and they're out because
Bodog
they're
fights,
going to lose money when you're trying to buy the best fighters.
Yeah, Bodog fights, all of that money, all of the internet money. Yeah. I believe it was Calvin Ayers coming
Calvin Ayers, yep. Look at all that money. Here's a guy that had a ton, and, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it if it's not thrown in the right direction. You've got to understand, yes, I can put out money for certain things, but I need to be selective in what I put money out for and how I go about marketing my product. And if you just think that throwing money at something is going to make it happen, it's not. And that's happened with every promotion. The UFC, look at when the Fertittas first bought it. These are guys they're great businessmen. They're incredibly successful. You can't get any better as far as business etiquette and knowledge. And they were not promoters. When they bought the UFC, they didn't know how to promote fights. And they went about, looking at doing some ad campaigns and things that they spent a ton of money on. And it was a failure because it just wasn't in the right direction of getting people's attention. And until they ended up, deciding to pay for the Ultimate Fighter, and that was a $10 million, chunk that they put out on the Ultimate Fighter. That was the right marketing. That was the right entity to get people's attention that caught the eye of the casual viewer too and made things successful for them.
We are back with you next week for a new episode of Let's Get It On, first available on Friday. On our next show, John and I will be broadcasting from St. Louis on site for Bellator Unfinished Business, Kimbo Slice versus Ken Shamrock. Download and subscribe to our podcast on the iTunes Store. For Android, download the Stitcher app and subscribe. And you can go straight to our website, letsgetitonpodcast.com. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/Let's Get It On Podcast, and on Twitter @PodcastMMA for this show, and for us personally, @John McCarthy MMA and @Sean Wheelock. To ask us a question, make a comment, or inquire about becoming a sponsor of Let's Get It On, email us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Again, that is info@letsgetitonpodcast.com. Please help us spread the word. Again, to all of you listening in the U.S., Canada, and around the world, this is very much your podcast as much as it is ours. For John McCarthy, our producer Chris Lakin, and our entire crew, I'm Sean Wheelock. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been a presentation of Ignotainment Media Network, online at ignotainment.com.
Let's Get It On with Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock, only on the Ignotainment Media Network. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in the comments section of the iTunes Podcast Store. If you have questions, comments, or are interested in sponsoring the show, contact us at info@letsgetitonpodcast.com or check out our additional lineup of podcasts, including Ocho Man, Behind the Eight Ball, The Whiskey Philosopher, and Youth Baseball Talk at ignotainment.com.